Welcome to Inside the Vault, Enterprise Bank's podcast series where we talk about items of interest to the small business community. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about commercial construction and renovation projects, and in particular, the interior design phase of that process, along with a little bit of insight on how those types of projects are financed. With me today is Catherine Montague.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Catherine. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Catherine is the founder and principal of Montague Design, which is a local interior design firm. And as many of you may have told or demised from Catherine's hello, she is not a native Pittsburgher.
No, I'm not.
But before we start talking about kind of the interior design process, particularly as it relates to commercial, I'd like to get a little background from you, Catherine, personally, and then on your firm, Montague Design.
Sure, thank you. Yes, well, I was born in Paris. I am French, and I moved to the U.S. a long time ago after studying international business, and love living in the U.S. I've lived in New York City. I lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, Florida, and Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is the place where I've lived the longest, and I feel that it's my home. So my firm has existed in numbers of cities around the country. And in Pittsburgh, what I love about it is that there's this diversity of style, that you don't have to be confined in one particular style. So you can really use your creativity.
So give us a little kind of history of the company. Historically, I think initially, you kind of focused on the residential component of interior design and have recently kind of expanded in the commercial world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So yes, starting with the residential side of the business, because this is where we live, to creating an environment when you can be supported through life, feeling that it is your sanctuary. And what came as a natural evolution, if you will, is the commercial side, because we do spend a lot of time at work. And I just feel like it's so important for us to be supported where we work. And it's also, I'm encouraging companies to use that as to use the interior design as part of their marketing strategy. So to have that congruency from the branding into the company, and so that not only your clients, but also your team members feel energized. How do you want them to feel when they come to work in the morning? So all these elements is a natural evolution into going into the commercial environment.
Yeah, and what I've seen in the commercial real estate lending space is particularly since the COVID pandemic, employers to attract talent to their companies are looking for amenities and feel and aesthetics in the space, to make it more of a kind of a welcoming environment versus the standard kind of sterile office that we were dealing with before.
And I think the younger generation is expecting more, which I think is really pushing all our buttons in a positive way, because they want to have that environment. And so when in terms of employee retention, if you take that into account, money is only the salary is wonderful, but it's only going to go so far. You want to build that loyalty. And also, I think the team members want to feel that the company is investing in them and supporting them in their success. So it's all that part that everybody is part of the success. So yes.
So with your obviously background being French and growing up in Europe and these different cities that you've been in, so you've kind of been able to, I'm assuming, kind of pull the architectural and the interior design ideas you've seen in different parts of the world and kind of integrate all that, correct?
Absolutely. I think what it brings to me is that understanding of the architecture and how you respect it. So and that goes for a home or a business. So this you have to have a respect for the architecture. And then you can introduce, complement the interior so that it's all congruent, if you will. So absolutely.
So let's talk about the planning process for anyone looking to, let's say, build a commercial building or even to refinish interior space in a building. The most important thing I think is this is kind of a team approach, and it takes time and foresight and planning. So can you kind of talk about, how you envision these types of projects rolling out in terms of the team involved, in terms of the planning process?
Yes, I'd be glad to, because I think the planning is so essential. I think a lot of people don't realize that you need to have a plan before you start construction. Sometimes we get contacted by clients. It's like, okay, we're ready to start construction at the end of the month and no planning has been done. And so you're going into a disaster scenario. You need the planning. So the first thing is to establish the scope of the project and your initial concept of what the budget is going to be, so that you have some kind of numbers in your head.
Which isn't as easy as it used to be with the cost of materials and labor. And
absolutely. It's really, but it's a key part. It's like a starting point. And then the next thing is to assemble your team. So if you need to do any kind of architectural drawings, you need to have an architect. Then the interior designer is, coming next or at the same time, and then having the contractor. Sometimes we are hired and then we refer the architect, and then we also refer the general contractor. So having that team from the beginning, what it does is, I always say it's easier to move a wall on paper than it is to move when it's built. So working together, the architect is going to do the space planning, the bones, the mechanical, and then we kind of establish the interiors. I mean, that's the beginning. And then the contractor coming in can already kind of, from what the design, the drawing, the preliminary drawing from the architect can say, okay, the contractor can say, well, this is going to be that number. And so that gives the ability to the client to decide, well, maybe, we don't do that.
I need to take some of the frills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's really being a supportive environment in that process.
Well, what I see, at least from my side of the table, because we finance a lot of construction projects, is your particular niche is sometimes overlooked until the very end. Because I can't tell you how many times, we've had a client engage an architect and a general contractor, and they build out the space, and it comes time to finish the interior, and they're clueless as to what the costs are for the interior finishes and the interior design. So I think it's a really important suggestion and point that interior designer, which you do, should be engaged right up front.
And it's really, we design all the interior architecture details. So the architect is going to do the shell, but then we have that communication with the client to understand really how not only is the space going to be used, but what are they trying to convey in terms of their branding or the company, what it represents. We go into the mission, the vision, really the values to integrate. So we integrate all of that, and we do select all the finishes. So we design cabinetry, we select all the tile, the flooring, like from the bathroom to the kitchenette to the flooring, to the architectural elements on the walls, lighting. So then we are able to convey, especially for items that are part of the construction, tile, flooring, lighting. We give all this specification to the contractor so that they can actually price it out. And then you get, a picture. So then the construction hasn't even started yet. Okay, so I'm very clear. We are still in the planning process. But then it allows the client to say, well, maybe we need to look at something else. Or, this is at that stage. And so it's really working, together to come up with the project.
And I'm assuming, when it comes to the interior design elements, there's a lot more flexibility. When you're building a shell, drywall is drywall,
Yeah,
carpentry is carpentry.
exactly.
And I'm assuming that the costs can vary significantly in the interior finish and interior design phase. And there's probably, I mean, you can maybe speak to some examples. There's probably, lower cost ways to still get the aesthetics that you're looking for.
I think this is part of the fun in some ways. We work with our clients. We're a team. So if we can find elements that are going to give you the look without having
The cost.
So we did a project where we wanted texture on the wall. It was a very long, 30 long wall. How do you break it up and make it interesting? And so we use laminate that looks like wood. And then we found this bamboo panels that have 3D, and they were mounted on the wall and then painted. And so you're creating texture at a very low cost. So we always find,
Work within the budget.
to work within the budget and yet create the interest. I mean, that's also part of that.
So do you get involved in kind of the budgetary review process with your clients?
Yes, we do. And we, because again, if we need to change anything or we can, if we need to alter anything, we are definitely giving them some of the information or communicating to the contractor so that they can actually price it. Yes. And that's what I just as a side note, I mean, we do those very detailed specifications and we communicate them on the drawing so that the contractor has all the information to price out the project.
So you're kind of working, kind of in tandem with the architect.
Absolutely, yes. And again, that part of the interior finishes, this is us that, going to select the finishes. So we convey all this information to the contractor so that they can actually give, a real price.
And I'm assuming when you're not talking about, brand new construction or a significant renovation project, it might just be, you tell me if I'm correct, it might just be you and the contractor without the architect if you're not actually redesigning
Absolutely.
The layout of the space.
You're right. I mean, if it's really like the space is fine and we also provide consultations where, for a few hours we can review what needs to be done, make selections. But absolutely, the most important is to be able to, before the construction starts, giving the selections to the contractor. And even if it's paint, whatever it is that you're doing, or redoing the ceiling, giving that information to the contractor, you're right. And sometimes there's no architect involved,
So the planning stage is obviously the most important. And, timing is everything. What would be your best advice to someone that is looking to upgrade their space for their office or their pace of business and or building? I mean, how far in advance should this kind of planning process?
I would give myself a few months, depending on the project. I mean, 3 to 4 months, you have to make decisions. Everybody's busy, so the client's responsibility is to be available and to be able to make decisions. But we take it from there. So allowing a few months, it might be 3 months, it might be 4 months, depending on the size of the project and what needs to be designed. The architect also needs to be able, if there's an architect involved, to do the drawings, and then to do the construction drawing. In a perfect world, we try to have plumbing, tile ordered, before the construction starts. So that's not an item that you want to wait on. Again,
that's an important consideration because some of these supply chain delays,
absolutely,
with specialty goods.
Goods. So we don't want. I always tell the client, we don't want to be the one delaying the project. So clear communication, not only with the architect and of course with the client, but with the contractor, so that we have a timeline, but we give them the information way ahead of time, so that they can place the orders. That's very essential.
So once the process starts, well, let's go back a step. So obviously, high percentage of commercial construction or renovation projects, there's financing involved. which is kind of my side of the
Yes.
table. So, our challenge as lenders in construction or major commercial renovation projects is getting the costs nailed down. And what we've seen, particularly since the disruption in supply chains and the costs of materials and labor increasing, is you've always got to plan for contingencies. So, what's your advice in terms of, I'm assuming you may give clients options or the contractors options that the client can choose from in terms of, if we go this direction, this is the cost. If we go this direction, this is the cost. And then some contingency planning too.
So when we do a presentation to the client, we really work in tandem with the client and they approve it. And again, when we select material, we're really conscious of the cost. And we might tell them, look, this is a very special element, but we feel that that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
And then we give it to the contractor that then, can say, well, this is going to be the cost, because there's the installation. I mean, it's, so, that's also a big part of it. So, yes, so we work in tandem, and if we need to reselect, then we can reselect at that time. Yes.
And what is your level of engagement as the construction or renovation project goes on?
Yes, that's a great question. So typically at the beginning, when they're starting to do, we don't have to be that involved.
Because they're building shell.
They're building the shell. So the architect is a bigger part of it. Now, you know very well that in construction, it's not if, it's when there's a surprise. I call it a surprise. So this is where the part of having a great team that works well together is key, because then the contractor can go back to the architect and to us and say, well, this is what's going on. And then together, we find a solution that can be presented to the client. Again, we want the client to focus on their life, making money, while we are taking care of all these details. So, so if there's a change like that that's going to affect the interior design, of course, we would be involved. But at the beginning, to your point, and that gives us time during that time when we've selected all the finishes to focus on furniture.
Which is a different component
It's
that
a different
your architects
component.
and general contractors aren't dealing with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and some of the decorative lighting and like all the this type of elements that are going to to be in the middle of that shell, if you will.
So with regard to that kind of furniture component, and I can tell you, I've had some of these construction projects where that was kind of an afterthought. But that's really important for employee comfort, functionality, that type of thing. So how do you kind of scope that, let's call it non-real estate portion?
So to your point, it's really part of the whole atmosphere of the office. You can't have one without the other. And so typically the client at the beginning either has given us some inspiration photos, or we'd worked with them. It's like, what do you want your office to know? And then we collaborate with some furniture companies. And then we offer like a 3-tier. So this is for that type of amount of money. This is what you're going to get. And if you want to go a little bit nicer, then if you want to go, and then there can be a mix. But again, it's based on the cost, but the look and to make sure that it's congruent again with the shell, that it's
So
want
you're
that
scoping that up front when you do your interior design consultation, what the furniture, let's say the non-real estate component is.
Yes, exactly. So, but the main focus, because we need to start construction as soon as possible, is to focus on that shell, and then the furniture is kind of the added element that complements the architecture, if you will. So this is a good time. Not everything is like, but that's, and again, giving cost options to the client so that,
Which that's important, because at least on the financing side, renovation, commercial construction, that's typically somewhat similar to the terms, not quite, but very similar to the terms that homeowners would be used to in a mortgage. Mm-hmm. Typically your commercial construction or renovation projects are going to have a 20 to 25 year term. not 30 like you can get on the residential side, but versus if you're financing interior like furniture, you're not doing that financing over that long of a period of time. That's going to be typically, a 5 to 7 year, because furniture is not going to last 25 years. So it does have a impact on the financing structure. Just for a little insight for our listeners. So typically the way that most of these commercial construction or renovation projects that you would be involved with go is, the customer can draw down their funds as they're paying their contractor or their architect. Typically, there's a monthly, what's called a draw schedule request. The contractor or the architect signs off on it. I'm assuming you sign off on if it has an interior design component to it. To make sure the whole team is kind of cognizant of this is the level the work is at versus the budget. And then the bank or the lender comes in and says, from a financing perspective, okay, we agree that this much work is done, and that those funds get advanced during the construction project. And then at the end, it terms out just like a regular mortgage would. But can't agree more that the most important thing is making sure all of the professionals involved in the design and construction process are all on the same page.
Oh, absolutely. It's not one person doing the project, it's together. And it's more fun. I always feel like, we're not solving the problems of the world, we're just making it more beautiful and holistic for everybody who inhabits the environment. So it starts from there. And the project is always better because I'm not the queen of all the ideas. Somebody might come and say, if we tweak, and especially when you're like some architectural elements, like I was talking to you about that wall, then we had lighting shift. I need like the cabinet maker said, okay, how are we going to do that? I can have the best ideas.
You're engaged a lot with your vendors and suppliers.
Absolutely. So we're very connected with them. And so it is fun too, because I love when they come up with ideas. And it's like fun working with architects, because how they maneuver. So everybody brings their expertise and for a better project.
But the creativity also, I think, really comes in, because I can tell you, and I'm sure you can share some war stories. As much as the planning process is very, very important, it doesn't mitigate every risk. There's always something that happens during the construction project where everybody needs to regroup and come up with a solution.
You're absolutely right. That's what I was saying earlier. You really need that team that is going to work well together for the client. There's no room for ego, no room for and also mistakes do happen.
Yeah.
We're human, and having that humility and being able to resolve it. So, however, what has been interesting to me is over the years, I used to panic over these situations and
change orders.
telling the client there's a perfect solution without having any idea what the solution is. What I found, though, is that sometimes the solution to that situation, I don't like calling problem situation, brings a better solution than the initial design. It's fascinating. I mean, it's really interesting to see. So being able to take a step back, deep breath, and say, okay, we're going to resolve that. And yes, I've had that happen a few times.
So give us our viewers and listeners some examples of some projects that you've done that have been really cool.
Yeah, so we worked on the manufacturing plant in Greensburg. For General Carbide,
which doesn't sound like an interior design place. I'm interested to hear about this.
Well, the fun part is the president and CEO is a woman, so she was very interested in bringing that holistic view. So, but she wanted to. The company has been in existence for 50 years. And wanted to move it to the 21st century. So it was very important to base it, to ground in the history, but moving forward. So we we wanted to, so she wanted us to bring wood, to bring metal, of course, because that's part of there, and then glass. And then, so and we integrated the colors also
Of their company.
of their company. So it's black and red. So we used a lot of red accents in the manufacturing level, if you will. And however, because the people working in the plant are standing up 8 hours a day, she wanted to create for their cafeteria. So we called it the cafe, that has a name. That was very soothing, welcoming,
Relaxing
and
for them.
very connected to nature. So the walls are green. We had beautiful wood tables carved out of a tree. So she really went the extra mile so that these people could have a soothing environment. So that was part of this. So that's one example that
It's neat. You wouldn't think, in that type of a manufacturing business,
yes,
that someone at leadership level had the foresight.
Well, and then on the second floor, it was the executive office. So again, it was a little bit more elevated because on the first level, because they're working with boots and so forth, we were able to have carpets and introduce some of the elements of metal in a different way. And yes.
Interesting. So what would be kind of your advice? Where does somebody start? A business owner that's looking to refresh their space or build new space, where do they start?
Well, I would suggest that maybe they start looking at inspiration, what other offices look like, because I think, and sometimes we help our clients because they said it's overwhelming to look at all these pictures. But maybe getting a sense that understanding or maybe asking their team, how do you feel about the office? Really having this open conversation and then, speak to professionals. And so it could be an interior designer first to refer the architect or the architect. And really being inquisitive about the process, about also having an idea of the cost that we were talking about. And I think that would be probably the best way to start, because you have to start someplace,
Well, let me get a little more general.
Okay.
You are a women-owned business, Montague Design. What is your best advice for folks that are either looking to get into business or grow their business? Not interior design, but just generally in business.
And to start a business, you mean? Yes. Well, you need to love what you're doing and really keep on dreaming and behaving like if you already are the success that you want. Also, finding the right people. So being open to meeting the best people who can help you. And you're only as good as your weakest link, somebody told me, and you need people to elevate around you who are going to be able to give you the support that you need. And then the dedication to your client. It's not about us. I always tell our client, one day we shut the door, you're stuck there, we're gone. And so we want them to feel really good. The best compliment when we do an office, for instance, is when the team members said, oh my gosh, we love it. That's what you want. So it's really about listening to the client, playing well with the team, putting the ego out, and that's good for any business.
Right.
Really, it's so.
Well, I can tell you're passionate about what you do.
I think it's because I want people to be happy. That's my part of.
That's your ultimate.
My ultimate. And feeling that you can use your environment and at home and at work. We do hospitality also. Wherever it is that, there's that feeling of peace.
Because obviously working or owning your own business is stressful. So that environment helps mitigate some of that stress if it's done right.
And we always bring plants in our design. So it's really not only about furniture, and they don't have to be real. They're beautiful plants, but it grounds the space. We are humans. We need nature, and there is that balance that it brings. So it's really about and creating your environment that is going to be making you feel good, And then if you have a home office, let's say you're starting, like, okay, having some of your rewards or things that are, what are you working for? Like it could be a dream board, but it could also be like pictures of you at work, like to remind you, and having your mission, your values on a wall somewhere is a good way to remind yourself to stay grounded no matter what happens.
Well, great insight, great advice. How do business owners or folks that are contemplating a project, how do they learn more about you and Montague Design?
Well, thank you. So we have a website, montaguedesign.com. They can also contact us and they can contact me directly, Catherine at montaguedesign.com. The phone number is 412-638-2696. We are on social media, LinkedIn.
So they can see some pictures of projects.
Yes, and we do a lot of
videos.
videos. We try to do videos behind the design so that people have a sense of how it all works together, how we work with the rest of the team. So yes, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the insight. For those of you that have any ideas for future episodes or questions, you can email us at insidethevault@enterprisebankpgh.com. You can check us out in audio format on all the major podcast platforms and in video format on YouTube. Catherine, thanks again for all the insight into what you do.
Well, thank you, David. It was wonderful.